All right, so hi everyone. Hope you are having a great day. Welcome to Watching You, a discussion on the Netflix series You, season 1 and 2. This discussion is being hosted by the Sam Houston State University Office of Health Promotion. My name is Brittani Clarkson, and I am the health educator for the Office of Health Promotion, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. I am joined by three very wonderful individuals, Michelle Castanon, Jeanine Bias-Nelson, and Chastity Williams. So hi, ladies. Thank you for being a part of our discussion.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you. So before we get started with our discussion, I would love it if you could tell us about yourselves, where you work, and what your position is. So we'll start with Michelle, we'll go to Jeanine, and we'll round off with Chastity.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Castanon. I work at SHSU Counseling Center. I'm a staff psychologist. I provide individual, group therapy, supervision.
And hi, my name is Jeanine Bias-Nelson. I'm at Sam Houston State University as well, and I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion and the Title IX Coordinator. At Sam Houston, I do things such as Title IX investigations, as well as consultation for any discrimination issues, sexual violence issues, and gender discrimination issues.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chastity Williams. I am the Outreach Education Manager for Montgomery County Women's Center. We are the local domestic violence and sexual assault advocacy agency. We provide things like 24-hour emergency shelter, counseling, resources, legal advocacy, and medical accompaniment.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, ladies, for joining me today, this discussion. I know it's something that we've been kind of talking about for a while, so I'm really glad that we can do it today, especially as it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So I think it'll be very timely, very relevant. So as I said, we'll be discussing the Netflix series You. If you haven't seen it, I really suggest that you pause this video and go and watch it. But for those who have seen it, we know that according to the official website, You is classified as a 21st century love story that asks, what would you do for love? And it turns out the main character, Joe, would do quite a bit. We're going to be talking about a lot of different themes that that are shown in the first and second season. And just as a warning, these themes are very strong in things like stalking, assault, intimate partner violence. So we just want to put that out there. So if any of these themes make you feel uncomfortable, if they trigger you to feel, a type of way, we want to let you know that that is what we will be talking about. Also, just as a spoiler alert, we will be kind of revealing the plot of the first and second season. So again, if you haven't seen it and you feel comfortable with those themes being portrayed on TV, definitely go and give that a watch before you continue watching this discussion. All right, so let's begin our discussion. In the first episode of the first season, we meet the main character, Joe, and then we meet a girl named Beck at Joe's job at a bookstore. We are privy to Joe's inner thoughts by this inner monologue, and he becomes intrigued with Beck, and he ends up using her credit card to learn her name and eventually learn more information about her. He goes down this social media rabbit hole and learns everything about Beck, everything from what she likes to eat, where she likes to go, who her friends are. And he takes that information and uses it to track her in real life and manipulates his situation to being able to run into her again. So my first question is this really stalking, or would this just be considered a romantic pursuit?
So here's the thing, as You starts to unfold, is that everybody has to remember we have the ability to see both sides of the situation. And so In the definition of stalking, stalking is threatening behavior, a pattern of threatening behavior. So from Beck's point of view, she has no idea what Joe is capable of or doing. And so under the common definition of stalking, she has no idea what's going to happen or happening at the time. I think also just in real life, Joe just does the most. Let me put it like that. And I don't think any of us are, if you meet somebody out, I've Googled people before just to find out who they are, if they have, any criminal background or anything like that. But at this point, I don't know if it is a relentless pursuit per se, or romantic. It's definitely not necessarily romantic. Joe takes some things and twists it. And so where most of us would normally try to find something out about somebody, once again, maybe follow them on social media, he just does the most. And it's kind of our first sign of what's to come. But at this point, we can't really classify it as anything.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree. And I think too that it's very interesting the line that we kind of flirt with in everyday life versus what we see portrayed, especially in the first episode. I remember when I watched the first episode feeling like, oh my gosh, we do this to people that we date, right? Like all of my girlfriends, when they get on, I don't know, some of the dating apps back when they were single, we would look them up on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and we would go down a rabbit hole. We would figure out who their mom was, who their cousins are, right? So you can start to like piece the puzzle together of who you think this person is. So the line gets blurred though, especially when you don't set good boundaries for that, right? And so absolutely what Jeanine said, we have the unique opportunity to see both sides of this story and see how kind of extra Joe can be. But from Beck's point of view, she doesn't know that that's happening. And I think that can oftentimes be the case for victims of long-term stalking, especially, that the framework is set in a way that they feel comfortable almost, or maybe it's this is coincidental or this is fate and we're just running into one another and it's not that big of a deal, right? Because they don't have that back information.
Definitely. I think you bring up the good point of like boundary setting. And I think Joe definitely pushes the boundaries, but I think also Beck opens up the boundaries with all her information being posted. And so in a sense, she hasn't protected her life, her whereabouts, her locations. Mm-hmm. And so it's very easy for him to put this whole picture of her together and know like her full day, where she lives, even her windows are open. And he even says it, oh, she wants to be seen. And I could see right through. So definitely, I think it's both parts. And here we see, like this show, both people. And I think it's the boundaries are very open and blurred.
Yeah, I think that's all really good information. And I think with Beck, at the time that Joe makes his way into her life, I think she was reading her poetry at this little club or coffee shop, and it wasn't really well received. So he's showing up when she's kind of emotionally vulnerable, right? And so maybe she wouldn't have noticed that, this is a little odd, or this is a little strange for this guy to just show up here, and she just kind of accepted whatever excuse or explanation he had. But had she not been in such an emotional, vulnerable state, do you think this is maybe something that could have been caught on to, or a sign or a red flag that may have been recognizable, that there's a very loose explanation for why someone keeps showing up?
I mean, I think obviously not the first time, but if somebody keeps popping up and being around just in your space, that's a red flag, especially if you haven't invited them into that space after the first or second time. The other thing is, and as Michelle pointed out, we can kind of curtail some of these red flags. there's some privacy things that you can do on your social media settings and stuff like that that Beck didn't do. And so that allows people that are predators. And that's what we're looking at when we're talking about Joe. He is a predator. And predators target people much like how Beck was, emotional, just in emotional distress, somebody that is looking for affection, that sort of thing. And so there are the red flags there. Sometimes with red flags, though, is whether or not we want to see them or not. And I think at that point in time, Beck did not want to see the red flags that Joe started to exhibit fairly early on.
I think we also need to be mindful of like our gut reaction, like what kind of feeling pops up for us, like, oh, is this creepy, or is this okay? Like, what kind of vibe do I get from this person? Are they showing up often? Are they giving me, you know, a certain feeling like I don't feel safe?
Awesome, thank you. So in another episode, Joe actually sneaks into Beck's apartment and snoops around, which we know that she leaves her huge picture windows wide open and doesn't have the best security. So sneaking in wasn't super difficult for him. He knew the layout of her apartment pretty well. But once he gets in, he just kind of snoops around, and he even takes a pair of her underwear. And when she returns back to her apartment, he hides in the shower as not to be seen. And his internal monologue says something like, I've seen, you know, enough romantic comedies to know that guys always get into situations like this. So even though the website says this is a love story, I think it's better classified as more of like a psychological thriller and not a romance. However, throughout the series, Joe kind of compares himself to romance novels and romance films, and even points out how his actions mirror those of romantic heroes. So why do you think we're drawn to stories where one character pursues another so relentlessly in the name of quote unquote love?
I personally think it's I don't know, it's something innate in us that we have propositioned these types of relationships in media and in culture to where those are the relationships that we seek out, right? I remember when the show first came out, when you would get on social media, it was like, I want to find a relationship that somebody loves me like Joe loves Beck, right? We're drawn to those kind of toxic, unhealthy relationships for some reason. I think a lot of it is historical, right? We've seen, I mean, you can go back into like the early 18th century and see depictions of unhealthy images of relationships that's what we're shown as examples. If we look at Romeo and Juliet, right? That's like one of the first stories we read about in like 6th and 7th grade, and how unhealthy that relationship was. But that's what we're given as examples. Very rarely are we given examples of healthy relationships to be what we try to mirror, what we seek out. We often look for those kinds of relationships in not only the movies that we watch, but the music that we listen to, right? We can, if you listen to there's one song by Eminem, I think it's Love the Way You Lie. I mean, when you listen to like how detailed of a toxic relationship that can be, and that's what we consume, right? When we watch TV shows or we're watching reality TV, those are the kind of relationships we're seeking out in the shows that we consume, in the movies we watch. It's just, I don't know why we're drawn to those kinds of relationships, but it's entertaining. It's what we seek for. I mean, I think now if you go on Twitter, like there's hashtags about hashtag my toxic trait, right? And people are like bragging about what their toxicity is in a relationship, like it's totally normal. And it is. It's what's been normalized in media and in film and in music. So it's very interesting.
I mean, I want to make sure that people understand that it's not bad for people to pursue you. It is, right. What makes it bad is when there is a pursuit that becomes so involved with you, so consuming that it takes up not only you but the other person, and that's what becomes concerning. And so, you know, on the surface, yes, Joe's pursuit of Beck can be seen as he puts it, love or romantic. But as you start to unfold the layers, you start to see manipulation, coercion, and some other things. And that's where the toxicity is, not just in the pursuit. We need to remember that, nobody's saying when somebody's pursuing you, or somebody looks you up, it's a bad thing. It is the layers that are beyond that which causes that pursuit. And then we have to ask ourselves, is this really about the pursuit, or is this about me, or is this about, just once again all of the layers and the boundaries and the predatory behavior that is part of that? And that's the two things that really need to be separated in all of this, is that are they truly in love and pursuing you, or is this just something that this person has created because they want to either manipulate or control, and they found somebody that they can do that with?
One word that comes to mind is like an obsession. It's like Joe's just obsessed with, with Beck, and that's his all. And like, he's trying to understand everything. And he even like tells his mind, like, I'm the best for you, and you need to have this friend out of your life. You need this guy out of your life. And I mean, of course, he ends up killing them, and, it's the way the show goes. But, that's really scary. And like you said, is this a healthy relationship? No.
Listen, going back to kind of what Jeanine mentioned, like not all romantic pursuit is bad pursuit, but what we see is like a relentless kind of thorough manipulative pursuit. And like Chastity said, there's tons of people online who are like, I want someone who loves me the way Joe loves Beck, and pursues me the way Joe, pursues Beck. And I think through social media, through music, through television, we've been taught that it's good to have somebody chase you, but where is that line, like in real life? Like, it's easy to see in TV when we can have kind of an omnipresent view of all the situations, but in real life, how do we find that line, and how do we not tiptoe so close to that line where we're having another person pursue us in a way that's actually unhealthy to fulfill what we have romanticized on TV?
I don't know. I think the line starts to come in is where you start to see the pursuit or the chase taking a different route. Meaning that if you start seeing some controlling behaviors, or if they start asking you to do things or not to do things that you typically like to do, or ask you to do things that you don't like to do, if all of a sudden the behaviors become not about you, because in this pursuit at some point somebody does get caught. And so once you are in a relationship with somebody, how does that change? Does the pursuit continue? Do they want to continue to make you happy and share your likes and dislikes, and you doing the same for that person too, which is also important? Or is once the pursuit is kind of over and you're in that relationship, does it become, well, no, you need to do the things that I want. You need to listen to the things that I do. I need to know where you're at all times. It's really that shift in the Prince Charming from that to this person that doesn't seemingly seem familiar, but you always go back in your mind to, but they were like this before. Maybe something's going on. Maybe they're stressed. They can always go back to that. But that's not the case. And so people need to really start paying attention to the signs once that honeymoon period is over, because that's when we start to really understand where those flags are and what the true pursuit in the relationship is.
And you made like a key point of like, how do you feel in this relationship? Are you like no longer happy? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling, depressed? Are you feeling scared? Because that could be a lot of good signs for you to be like, hey, this is not a good relationship for me.
Yeah, and I think too, like really asking yourself, like, are you being honest with yourself in what's happening in that relationship? I mean, I had a client once who told me that she started a relationship with this guy, who later became her husband, and it was very similar in the pursuit. It was when she would show up at the nail salon, there would be flowers waiting for her at the nail salon before she got a pedicure. And, you know, some of us might think, oh my gosh, like she did, that's so sweet. He remembered I was going to get my nails done. And so he left me flowers, right? But really what that was, I'm going to leave you flowers here to make sure you mention it, to make sure you went where you actually said you were going, right? So picking up, I think just being really honest with ourselves, giving room for that person to express themselves in a loving way, and doing those kind gestures, but also being realistic and asking yourself, is this really a kind gesture, or is there underlying manipulation that could be attached to this this gesture that was just given?
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. So shifting gears a little bit, throughout the show, there are actually quite a few, and in both seasons, there's quite a few examples of Joe actually doing some kind of kind and nice and helpful things for others. For example, he shows kindness to Paco, his young neighbor, and then in the second season, he's very kind to Ellie, his new young neighbor. So how does this quote unquote good side of Joe contribute to our thoughts about him?
I mean, I think that that's what draws us to Joe, right? That he has some still very humankind qualities about him that makes him endearing at some point. And so that, but it's also a window to how he's gotten to where he is. So in the first season, his connection to Paco really spoke to me because it starts to reveal maybe that was the type of childhood that he had. And so, yes, while he may hurt others, he still protects people that he feels a likeness or a connect to. And that happens a lot with predators and people that have manipulative behaviors or qualities about them, is that they still connect with people that have trauma that's been associated with them, that does not stop them from doing the manipulation or the other behaviors to people that they don't seem to be like. And so that's where we kind of see this split. And unfortunately, you know, Netflix did a great job in having us kind of, well, he's so nice here and he's just protecting these people here. But we have to remember that everybody has different relationships with different people. And at the end of the day, it's really about still Joe's behavior towards women, in particularly women that he was trying to date or pursue. That is what the concerning thing is, regardless of what he did outside of those relationships.
But I think that brings up a good point too, is that, you know, I feel like we have that same dialogue with anybody who is, we find out is some sort of sexual predator in particular. Almost always we hear, I can't believe they would do that. They were a little league coach, or they were a minister at my church, or they were the room mom, or they were the, you know, PTO dad. We have this idea that just because people have good qualities in them, that they can't do bad things. And unfortunately, what we know is that especially individuals who seek control and manipulation and coercive behaviors in those kinds of relationships, they are very good at being very manipulative. And although we see Joe having these relationships with the kids, especially in this like very natural, organic way, that doesn't mean he didn't have underlying motive, right? We've only seen one piece of it. So there very well could be motive for building those relationships with those kids at an early age. We don't know. We haven't gotten to see them blossom yet, right? So being open to the idea that he may be really nice to kids, but also he may be a real creep, and there might be a bigger reason why he's being so nice to those kids.
Definitely. The word that comes to mind is like grooming. Like, I feel like Joe is grooming the community, you know, putting things in place where, you know, somebody could stand up for his character. There was just this manipulation, like, what can they give me? So definitely, I feel like Joe was grooming the kids as well as, you know, other people throughout the seasons.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting how with Joe's inner monologue with Paco, it seemed like he just wanted to help him out of his current situation so that he could live a better life. He didn't really question like what path Paco would go down or what he would be in the future. But when it came to Ellie, he wanted to do all he could. And he actually wondered, what's this going to do to your future? You know, are you going to sink or swim? Can you use this and build yourself up over it, you know, or not? So that was really a very interesting shift in mindset with Joe's character about how he thought about this younger kid that he was helping. So is would that shift in mindset still be considered grooming, or was he just kind of working with the circumstances that were in front of him?
I don't think he was just working with the circumstances that were in front of him, because there's lots of people that just would have stayed out of the situation. So I think it's a little bit beyond that. I think that particularly with Paco and really Ellie, that he found some connection in them, in which he was drawn to and really wanted to help them. And whether it was grooming or, you know, just something almost like a mentoring relationship, there's something beyond just being the good Samaritan there. And so, you know, I really think that he was drawn to those two characters.
I feel like he was even more drawn to Ellie, like where he put a tracker on her phone and like went and killed the guy who, you know, was going to sexually assault her. I just feel like maybe she was female, or, I mean, I don't know what his reasonings were, but I felt like with the phone tracking device, like he was more controlling.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think that it has something to do with those gender roles that he took on more with Ellie, because of the control that he wanted to exert in the female relationships that he had, right? In the female relationship that he had with his mother and his inability to control her circumstances. I think with Paco, he saw himself in that child, and so he was able to see like a future already paved out for him. But with the young lady, it was more, well, maybe if I can overexert my efforts now, I will send you on a different path.
I think he might have also seen what he saw in some of the women that he was attracted to at an older age in Ellie, and maybe wanting to have her be independent to where she was not subject to the predatory behavior that he exhibits later on. I mean, and I think that's definitely shown through him trying to protect her, specifically a male that was similar to him in a lot of ways, and that was trying to manipulate Ellie into working with him and doing other things. Joe saw that, was like, I'm going to put an end to that.
So Joe definitely had a mindset of there are, you know, terrible people in the world that you, whether that be Beck or whether that be Ellie, or whether it be Love, terrible people in the world that you need to be protected from, and just didn't have the self-awareness to see that, you know, they also need to be protected from him. So do you think that is a realistic character trait of somebody who perpetrates violence against another, that they see themselves as some sort of protector, or that other people are worse in some sort of way?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Denial of like, I'm the hero here. Are you just, you know, I don't have any of these problems. I'm not a predator. I don't think Joe even saw himself as a predator. He was helping out, you know, Ellie and Paco and Beck and all the other women.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, especially in relationships where abuse is really prevalent, I think most of those relationships, right, one of the people have exhibited past relationships, whether that be mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, also have violence present in that relationship. And so as long as they are not exerting violence in the same way that those people did, then I'm not bad, right? Well, he hit you and I won't ever hit you, but I might yell and scream at you and belittle you and put you down. That's not the same though, right? I'm not actually being degrading because I'm not physically hitting you. So it's easy to set boundaries in their minds, or separation in their minds of, well, I don't do this behavior, so I'm not as bad as that person. I'm just trying to protect you and make you have a realistic view of yourself, right?
I mean, I think it can also be, we see get glimpses of Joe's childhood, and I think that he felt that he wasn't loved. And so his way, in some, morbid sense, was he was giving more love than he received, or at least that's how he explained it. And so that overboardness goes back to what Chastity and Michelle were saying, is that, hey, I didn't receive this. I'm giving you everything that I possibly have. I'm giving you all the attention when I got none. And so it justifies the behavior in some sort of way, but it's still toxic.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of talked about Joe's relationship with Ellie. And I thought it was interesting how Joe used Beck's unlocked cell phone. He kind of got in the cloud, and he was able to track her with her own, unsecured cellular device. But with Ellie, he ends up putting the family tracker on her and tracked her that way. So Beck never really caught on to the fact that she was being tracked from her lost cell phone, but Ellie was able to see that she had this family tracker on her phone. Can a person really tell, or how can a person tell if they're being tracked? Like Beck wasn't able to, but Ellie was able to. So if there's some kind of like family tracking device or anything like that on a phone or on a computer, can a person really point that out, and how can they kind of circumvent the system to keep themselves safe?
Unfortunately, there are apps out there that you can put a tracking device that looks like a calculator on people's phone, all sorts of things. Unfortunately, one of the best ways to prevent that from occurring is to know where your phone or something like that is at all times. Same thing with cars. I've heard of situations and had consultations with people where there was recording device under their car seat and things like that. And so if you think that you're in a relationship with somebody that feels the need to have that control or know your whereabouts, you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself by knowing, hey, where are my car keys at? Or, if somebody's asking for them and wants to drive your car for some strange reason that they've never wanted to do that before, or just see your phone real quick or something like that. If you think something's on it, if your phone is running slow or differently, take it into the cell phone shop, see if there's any apps been downloaded recently. I mean, there's some things that we can do, but unfortunately, in the situations like with Ellie and even with Beck, is that when you have somebody take some of that control, it's hard to undo sometimes once they've done it.
Yeah, and I would say also, if you're an iPhone user, go into your app store, and you can look at the apps purchased and the apps on this phone so that you can view those apps. Not always, but the majority of the time, you're going to be able to see any of the apps that are currently running on your phone there. Another thing is really ask yourself these questions before you make a joint phone bill. Because what we do know is that if you are an authorized user on somebody's cell phone bill, you do not have to be the owner of the phone to call your cell provider and say, hey, I can't find this phone. I need you to find my iPhone, or track this phone down and let me know where it's at. My wife's phone is missing and she can't find it, so I'm calling on her behalf, right? So ask yourself those questions beforehand and understand that if you are in a relationship where you think that might be happening and you need some sort of privacy, I highly recommend getting a tracker phone, or a burner phone, I'm sorry, to have as a backup that person doesn't know about. Be very diligent and safe about where you keep it and where you hide it, just in the event if they were to find it, what that might lead to as far as fights erupting or things like that. But having the ability to have a burner phone that maybe even as a flip phone, because the reality is like we might think that if we turn off our geo settings and none of our apps are allowed to use our locations, it doesn't matter. Those phones are still tracking your location. If you use Google on your phone, you have a track of where that phone history is. So a flip phone is even great for a burner phone if that's possible.
Okay, so in both seasons 1 and 2, Joe commits many crimes, just a numerous amount of crimes. In addition to stalking and murder, breaking and entering, theft, assault, holding a person against their will. He just commits so many crimes. Is it realistic that someone who exhibits a stalking behavior is likely to commit other crimes as well? Or was this just dramatized for TV's sake?
Well, I think that even like murder suicide rates are high with stalking, domestic violence. And that's something that people need to be aware of, that, even in the state of Texas, I don't have the stats, but it's pretty high.
Yeah, especially with IPV relationships. If violence has already broken out, stalking is usually the second step or the third step. Stalking isn't typically the first step. In those relationships, it usually is manipulation and coercion, and then it leads into more physical and emotional abuse. And when that person attempts to leave that relationship, that's where we see long-term stalking really show its head. And what the unfortunate reality is that 70% of those relationships where the person has already left the relationship and is now being stalked by their former partner, that's when murder ends up happening typically.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was some dramatization about some of the things that Joe was doing, but ultimately there is kind of a spectrum or continuum of once some predatory behavior stops, there are the next phase, as Chastity was saying. And so it's best to try to catch those signs of those behaviors early on so they don't progress into other things that are even more criminal or even more disruptive to your life.
And just along those same lines, would it also be considered realistic that a person who exhibits these stalking behaviors would harm a victim's family or friends like Joe did to Peach and Benji and Delilah?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody that they can find a connection to, that you have a connection to, because unfortunately sometimes, much like what we saw in Joe, he rationalized his behaviors. And so in rationalize that behavior, it is, well, I'm going to talk to this friend, or I'm going to try to manipulate somebody else to see my side of the story to get them, trying to build some allies so the other person will come back or will do what I need them to do. It's once again still about that control and manipulation. And unfortunately, that is one of the first things that somebody will do, is try to kind of ally with family members or friends, make sure that they have their contact information. And so once again, when we look at strategies, early on, is it really important for them to have your mom's information, your dad's information, your best friend's information? Sometimes early in a relationship, it's good to keep some of those things private so you have outlets to go talk to. But with the behavior of Joe, he made sure that he had connections or ways to meet and know those people, to where when the time came, he can use them as part of a means to control and manipulate anybody that he was in a relationship with.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I like real life scenarios to put, I don't know, kind of a picture to what we're talking about. But last year in my hometown, actually in Livingston, which is in East Texas, there was a situation where a husband and wife, they had split ways. He had been stalking her long term. one day he just said, like, today's the day. He went to a local bar. He got really, really intoxicated, went to the family's home, and ended up murdering her, the baby, her dad, and her grandmother, I believe. So definitely, if it's let me exert the power and the control and the dominance over whoever is standing in my way in this relationship. And if your family is telling you not to be with me, or if your best friend is telling you not to be with me, they are no longer an ally. They are somebody who is trying to come in between our relationship, and in told they need to be dealt with, or they need to be taken care of. And so that's really how they see them. We also see that happen with isolation in relationships. Oftentimes, when somebody raises a red flag, or has an opinion that maybe that person doesn't agree with, we will see that partner try to remove themselves from those connections, those relationships. A big red flag, in my opinion, is, in the beginning of a new marriage, what do we see? Somebody gets a new job and you move away, right? But that can also be a big red flag, because why are you moving away? Is it really just the job, or was this person seeking that job so that he would get you, or she would get you away from your family, your loved ones, your support system, or your outlets to have to vocalize maybe what's happening in the relationship?
And Chastity, that's very interesting, because one thing that I noticed is with Joe, except for like the final 2 episodes of the first season, he was never violent with Beck. He maybe got frustrated with her and maybe raised his voice at her, but he never physically abused Beck, and he never was violent with Love in the second season. But all of a sudden, he, snapped and killed Beck at the end of the first season. So would you say that that's a realistic portrayal of how a relationship with a person like Joe could end?
So what I would say is that realistic, maybe not so much, but I would say that it happens. To say it doesn't happen would be unfair to some of the women who have lost their lives. But I think it is a continuum, like we talked about. It is a progressive sort of thing. Oftentimes, these relationships don't start off with physical abuse. It starts out with manipulation and coercion, and the put downs and things like that. And eventually it progresses into something more. Some people are never hit or never physically abused in their relationships. But the mental abuse that they endure is just as heavy as I can't tell you how many clients I have had tell me to my face, I would rather be hit every day for the rest of my life, because the bruises heal, the cuts heal, but the way I feel about myself after dealing with years of somebody putting me down, I will never come back from that. It takes years of self-work in therapy to come back from that kind of mistreatment. I mean, it's awful. I think one area we kind of need to be better at as a whole is not comparing the types of abuse, right? Because physical violence and emotional violence are just as heavy on someone. But to say that it's realistic, maybe not so much, but progressive in that way, absolutely it can happen. The relationships can start out where the abuse is typically just mental, verbal, emotional, and it can last that way for years. And maybe you're stuck in that kind of cycle for years, and then all of a sudden one day the person just snaps and starts being more physically violent.
Okay, so we've just got a couple more discussion and questions I wanted to hit on. So in the second season, we do see that Joe, he kind of befriends Love's brother 40 for, just a couple of different reasons. But one thing that Joe does with that friendship is he uses it as a way to keep tabs on Love, even after they break up. And though he didn't ask him, 40 kind of goes to bat for Joe. For Love to take him back and things like that. So we also saw that Joe, unlike in the first season where he couldn't stand Beck's friends, he actually really liked and got along with Love's friend and actually spent some time one-on-one with Gabe, I think his name was, and did kind of that healing cleanse thing that he did. So is it common for those who stalk and abuse their partners to have a positive relationship with their victims' family members or friends?
I would say definitely. I mean, whatever they can get out of that relationship, I feel like with 40, they were using each other. 40 was getting something out of, from him and vice versa. So I think it's definitely possible.
I mean, I think I said this in a previous question. It's about finding an ally. And it's about continuing to have your scope of control. And so the more people, the more friends and family that like you or support you, that's going to keep that person ultimately in that relationship. Because the last thing that they want to do is disappoint their friends, if their friends already like you, or disappoint their family members, if their family members have found connections with you. And so, it's still another form of manipulation, regardless if we want to see it as a positive relationship. There's an end goal in mind. And once these friends know either liked or they started seeing the signs before the other females, they became disposable. And so you have to be able to kind of look at, yes, it was a positive relationship, but it was they were relationships that really had a reason behind them. And it wasn't just solely based off of, I like you. It was really about still the control of the primary relationship.
When I think manipulators do that strategically, right? Like they're looking for those kinds of relationships that they can build on so that, like you said, they can get something out of it. Once they can no longer get something out of it, like you said, it is disposable. But it can also be used as a way to dismiss what's actually happening to that victim. I had a client once tell me that her family did not believe when she came forward and told them that her husband had been physically abusive. They didn't believe her so much that when charges were brought up against her ex-husband, her own father, paid for his attorney fees.
I mean, and we saw this a lot specifically with 40. As stuff started being unveiled with Love, you knew that there was no way that Love could be in any sort of relationship with anybody without the support from 40 and without that other person knowing and almost being, it's almost like 40 was her child. And, a lot of times we introduce somebody in a relationship to our children. Well, 40 was a lot like that. And so Joe knew that the way to get to Love was really first through 40. And so he had to develop that relationship. It wasn't, just coincidental. He knew that he had to develop that relationship as part of his research and everything else that went into him wanting to be with Love.
Right. And what kind of toll does that take on a victim to know that this person who's causing them so much physical or psychological pain is kind of buddy and having such a great relationship with their family and the people that they hold closest to them, and they feel like they can't say anything?
It cuts off the people that you can tell. It makes people feel, here's where a lot of victim blaming comes into play. Like, what did you do? Like, they're always nice around me. It really cuts off your lifelines. And so it can truly affect a victim when they don't have anybody that they have an individual connection with to turn to. And so, we see this a lot, particularly with sexual assault, when everybody's in the same circle. But then also in domestic violence and interpersonal relationships, when you have somebody that you don't have an outside circle. And so you're choosing between two people in a circle, and that can be detrimental to the victim because they feel like they have no place to turn. So they say nothing at all and stay in that relationship, as unhealthy as it may be.
And how alone they feel, that, what their experience is not validated, that maybe they're not believed, and maybe they're thinking like, is it my fault? Like you said, the victim blaming. What am I doing wrong?
Okay, so kind of wrapping up our discussion, let's kind of go back to where we started. How might a show like You influence our cultural or our social understanding of stalking? And could that be helpful or could it be harmful?
I think I'll jump in first. I think that it can be both, right? And so I think it can be helpful because it is a depiction of something that maybe somebody's experiencing in their own life, but seeing it on the screen and seeing all those signs, then they can be like, oh my goodness, this is happening to me. But on the flip side, without kind of taking away those layers, it can go back to some of the first conversations that we were having, in that somebody sees it as romantic or sees it as Chastity was saying in the beginning, I want somebody to pursue me like Joe. So it's a catch-22. It puts us in two different circumstances as to where some of the things become justified, particularly if you've never been in a type of relationship like that. It seems romanticized, but then for somebody that has experienced those things, to see that happening with somebody else kind of gives them some insight to, okay, this is what I know what to look for the next time. And so while it's dramatized and while it's exaggerated in some points, I think that there are mirrors to real life that we can draw from and hopefully assist somebody. Maybe who's ever listening to this, it will help them break down what you're seeing in the show, so you don't romanticize the things. And like I said, for the other people, it gives them some support as to, this does really happen out there, and here's how I can move forward.
I feel like the show has brought a great dialogue when I do presentations with residence halls, especially female dorms. We talk about this show and we talk about the different examples, and a lot of the residents and students talk about their own experiences with stalking, and their boyfriends or their partners are wanting their passwords on their phone. And so I think it brings up a great dialogue that we can have.
I agree. I think just consuming responsibly, right? If your kids are watching it, having appropriate conversations with them about it. If you hear friends talking about it, start a conversation where you're able to dissect the show and view it as entertainment, because it is, right? But also acknowledging what the content is and the types of stories that are similar to the relationships that are depicted in the show, and how we can have those conversations to help change them, or to just be more aware of them for our friends, for our family, whoever that we know that might be experiencing those kinds of relationships.
Okay, awesome. And lastly, what is the biggest lesson you feel college students should take away from watching this show and listening to this discussion?
Put passcodes on everything.
Protect.
Don't share them.
Yes, protect yourself. Social media, what's out there, cyberspace, protect yourself.
Absolutely. Don't leave yourself open to some of these situations. As we said in the beginning, there are some things that could have warded off this. As soon as Joe tried to find somebody in Facebook, that privacy page would have popped up, and then would have known that, okay, you're not going to let me in that easily. And so definitely, I think that the key thing is protect yourself and be wary of when people start asking for things like passwords and wanting your phone or knowing where you're going and stuff like that.
And definitely there's help out there. So if you are, scared or fearful or anxious, the Counseling Center, the Montgomery Women's Shelter, Title IX, there's a lot of great resources.
Awesome. So can we just go down, we'll do Michelle, Jeanine, and then Chastity, and just give students some information about how they can get in touch with you or your office should they need any kind of support as a result of hearing this conversation. or support that they can point others to?
Definitely. The counseling center is open. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can call and make an appointment. We're doing telehealth currently. So we do sessions via, over the phone, over DoxyMe. And so we do individuals. We have different groups. We have workshops. We also have workshops on healthy relationships and what a healthy relationship looks like, and getting those tips and tools, as well as looking at the warning signs.
For equity inclusion in Title IX, obviously we reach out to the counseling center, health center, and Safe House and Montgomery County Women's Shelter as resources to anybody that reports to us. But, particularly if somebody feels like they're distressed and in a relationship, and specifically if it is affecting your education, that's what we're here for. To provide you services to get you back on track, whether that be a no contact order when you feel like you can't tell that person to go away, whether it mean changing your residence hall, if they know where you live and you want to change that out, whether it being, serving as liaison or assistant with local law enforcement to get you the help that you need, possibly in county or on campus. And then ultimately, looking into other ways and other options and sitting down with you and coming up with a plan. How can you balance what other trauma that is associated with your relationship and still being in school? And that goes for employees, faculty, or staff as well. If you're experiencing something at home, how does that affect your workplace? And so that's how we try to go in and help somebody as best as possible. You can report right now, unfortunately, virtually by phone, email, or online reporting system. But hopefully when we get back to our quote unquote normal, we take walk-ins where somebody can sit down and go through an intake, give you options on what all your resources and services are, and then really individualize a plan for you to help best deal with the trauma and still your pursuit of education at the same time.
Yeah, in the Women's Center, we are still providing resources. We have our 24-hour hotline is always open. Anybody can contact that number. It's 936-441-7273. And you can call and process what is happening over the phone with an advocate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that resource is still there and available. We are still providing counseling services. The majority of our counseling services are being provided remotely through a HIPAA compliant website. I think Michelle might have mentioned it.
DoxyMe.
Yes, DoxyMe. I've not used it because I don't see clients in that regard. So I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do know it's HIPAA compliant, and I do know that it's completely confidential. So we're still providing services in that way. We are still providing services at our shelter as well. It's a limited capacity just so that we are observing the state recommendation and CDC recommendations. So we are limited on space, but we can bring clients in if they're in imminent danger and need a safe place to go. We are also still providing legal resources, primarily remotely again, but we do have some attorneys who I believe are still seeing people face to face at this time on a case-to-case basis. But for us, the reality is our services are so essential. And so we want to make sure that right now, especially, we've seen an increase in numbers of intimate partner violence. We've not seen a decrease. I think last month alone, we had, it was a pretty significant increase from where we were last year. I don't want to say a number because I don't want to say it wrong, but it was pretty significant. We had 1,000 or more calls just last month alone with people who are seeking resources and services. So the need is still ever there, and we are still trying to meet the need for the community. We're also able to provide all of our curriculum, which is research and education based, remotely for free. So we have healthy relationship curriculum, domestic violence curriculum. We have some bullying curriculum. I mean, we kind of cover everything. And that's completely free. So if anybody's interested in accessing any of that information or receiving that education, just reach out to the Women's Center and we can help you out.
I want to, circle back and just say, typically we all collaborate with each other. And I think that that's, most important. So if somebody is seeking resources or services or programming, you typically have people from all of these different sectors and subject matters all at one table. So you don't have to go far to get the services that you need. And I think that that's really what's great about St. Houston, and what's great about, our connections with each other, is that we're going to make sure that you get the help that you need, or the education and awareness that you need to help somebody else.
Very true, very true. Well, I think we are at our time, ladies. So I want to say again a big, big thank you for joining this discussion and bringing your expertise and your insight and your experience. It was very great to have you. If anyone has any questions or would like to continue this discussion online, you can definitely connect with the Office of Health Promotion on Twitter and Instagram at SHSU_OHP, or you can send us an email at healthpromotion, no S, at shsu.edu. We hope you enjoy, and there was many more questions we could have covered. Probably we could have gone on for another hour. But I want to encourage you again, if you haven't watched the show, to watch it, rewatch it, and just really kind of think about some of the themes and what questions you may have. So with that, I will say thank you again, ladies, and have a good day.